class, and welcome to this episode of The One with the Predecessor Auditor.
Oh my God!
Now, some of you may ask, what happens when auditors change? Well, here's some background information for you. A newly engaged auditor will perform a number of steps in communicating with the predecessor audit firm, including making certain inquiries and reviewing the audit documents, working papers, of the predecessor auditor. The major objective is to examine the types of information that would be available to an auditor in an ongoing engagement. By referring to the work of a predecessor auditor, a successor auditor may obtain relevant input and extensive review and risk assessment procedures that are necessary in an initial audit. Note that the purpose of reviewing a prior auditor's working paper is not to audit or evaluate their work. Rather, we're trying to gather information that will be relevant to our new audit engagement for the current year. Also, we're not allowed to rely upon the prior auditor's work or use it to supplement our own evidence for the current year's audit. However, it can provide a useful starting point for us and help us direct our efforts in gathering sufficient appropriate information about our new client and considering whether accounting principles have been applied correctly. Now, here are some important terms we're going to start with. The predecessor auditor is an external auditor who has reported on the most recent audited financial statements or who was engaged to perform but did not complete an audit of the financial statements and has resigned, declined to stand for reappointment, or has been notified that his or her services have been or may be terminated. Next, what a successor auditor is. A successor auditor is the outside auditor of an organization that replaces the predecessor auditor. Thus, the successor auditor conducts the audit for the current year when there was a predecessor auditor in the immediately preceding year. Now, it is important to know what needs to be communicated. Inquiry is necessary as the predecessor auditor may be able to offer information that will assist the successor auditor while determining if they accept an engagement or not. But they must always keep in mind that the predecessor auditor and the client may have disagreed about accounting principles, auditing procedures, or similarly significant matters. Requesting permission. The successor should request permission from the prospective client to make sure these inquiries can be asked of the predecessor auditor, keeping in mind that, except as permitted by the rules of the Code of Professional Conduct, an auditor is precluded from disclosing confidential information obtained in the course of an engagement, unless the client specifically contests. Therefore, the successor should request the client to authorize the predecessor to respond fully to the successor auditor's inquiries. This is a key part as it will be a red flag if the prospective client refuses to permit the predecessor auditor to respond or limits the response. The successor auditor should inquire as to the reasons and consider the implications of a refusal and declining as to whether to accept an engagement or not. Now some information on the reasonable and specific inquiries regarding materials. The successor auditor should make reasonable and specific inquiries of the predecessor auditor in regards to materials that will assist the successor in determining whether to accept or reject an engagement. These will include disagreements with management as to accounting principles, auditing procedures, and other similarly significant matters, communications to the audit committees or others with equivalent authority and responsibility regarding fraud, illegal acts by clients, and internal control related matters, the predecessor auditor's understanding as to the reasons for the change of auditors, the predecessor auditor's understanding of the nature of the company's relationship and transactions with related parties and significant unusual transactions, as well as the successor auditor should also ask the predecessor about the reasons for the change of auditor. From their perspective, why are they no longer auditing this client? Was there a disagreement about fees or an accounting issue? The response obtained in comparison with his prospective client's answer to the same question should provide information that might bear on the integrity of management. Next, we're going to move on to other matters to be inquired upon. Predecessor auditors should respond promptly and fully on the basis of known facts to the successor's reasonable inquiries. However, should the predecessor auditor decide, due to the unusual circumstances such as impending
threatened, or potential litigation, disciplinary proceedings, or other unusual circumstances not to respond fully to the inquiries, the predecessor auditor should clearly state that the response is limited. If the successor auditor receives a limited response, its implications should be considered in deciding whether to accept the engagement or not. If the response is limited, this again is a red flag. Hey Madison, how did the accountant stay out of debt?
I don't know, Kate, how?
He learned to axe his wage.
Whoopah!
Now for some other communications during an inquiry. One key component during a client request. While requesting for the client to authorize the predecessor to allow the successor auditor access to materials, one key component is allowing the successor to review the predecessor auditor's working papers. Consent and acknowledgement letter. The predecessor auditor may wish to request a consent and acknowledgement letter from the client to document this authorization in an effort to reduce misunderstandings about the scope of the communication being authorized.
It is also customary in such circumstances for the predecessor auditor to make himself or herself available to the successor auditor and make available for review certain of the working papers. The predecessor auditor should determine which working papers are to be made available for review and which may be copied. The predecessor auditor should ordinarily permit the successor auditor to review working papers, including documentation of planning, internal control analysis, audit results, other matters of continuing accounting and auditing significant, such as working papers containing an analysis of balance sheet accounts, those relating to contingencies, related parties, and significant unusual transactions. Also, the predecessor auditor should reach an understanding with the successor auditor as to the use of the working papers. The extent, if any, to which a predecessor auditor permits access to the working papers is a matter of judgment.
Now, putting it all together, it is important that all the information that the successor auditor receives during this process is sufficient, appropriate, and consistent. This will help determine whether or not to accept an audit engagement, as well as if that information was complete and well documented by the predecessor auditor. The nature and timing is also affected by the depth of understanding, and this will also have influence on whether or not to accept an audit engagement.
Thanks for watching!
Welcome to the real world. It sucks. You're gonna love it.